There are moments in life that last only a few seconds, but leave an impact that lasts a lifetime. They shape you, define who you are. For me, that moment happened in a dark, silent room, a moment when everything changed forever. My name is Hanai. I was in my third year of college, and up until that day, I had always defined my life as ordinary. I was invisible, quiet, someone no one noticed. But that day, I was noticed. Wrongfully, by the wrong person in the worst way possible. If I could go back in time, I would never have stayed in that classroom after the lesson. But people grow from their mistakes, don't they? I just wanted to save my grades. Instead, I had to learn how to protect my boundaries. And to do that, I had to find the strength to say no to someone who tried to cross them. That day, I had learned I had failed my math exam. I remember the panic. If I couldn't improve my grades, I would fail the course. The mere thought of telling my family made my stomach churn. So after class, I decided to stay behind. I had no other choice but to ask the teacher for help. The classroom was empty. The sun had started to set, and its golden light streamed through the windows. That light always unsettled me, stirring a strange uneasiness in me. But that day, I didn't know what it meant. Everything felt off. Professor Panaka was at his desk, shuffling through some papers. It was so quiet I could hear the rustle of the sheets. When I stepped inside, he looked up and gave me a faint smile. At that moment, I felt something strange in his gaze. I tried not to overthink it, but there was something unsettling about it. "Why are you here, Hanai?" he asked. His voice was as usual. Perhaps it was a little warmer than normal, or maybe that was just in my head. Embarrassed, I looked at the ground and started to speak. "Professor, my grades are bad and I need your help," I said, my voice uneven. I was so ashamed, but I couldn't let that stop me from asking. "All right," he said softly, setting his papers aside and standing up. As he walked toward me, the silence in the room pulled at me like a vacuum. My heart was pounding, not because of the help he might offer, but because of how he was approaching me. I kept my eyes fixed on the floor, but I could hear every step. The faint crush of carpet under his feet, the rhythm of his breathing, it all grew louder in my ears. And I was starting to feel alarmed. He sat down next to me, too close. There shouldn't have been such little space between a teacher and a student, but I didn't have the courage to tell him that. I could sense it, something was wrong. But what if I was overreacting? What if he was only trying to help? I was so anxious. My mind waged a war against itself. "You know, Hanai," he said. His voice was softer than usual, and that softness unsettled me even more. He said I would need to work hard to fix my grades, and that he believed I could do it. I felt a strange weight on my shoulders. He had placed his hand there, lightly, and I froze. I couldn't move. In that moment, there were two voices in my head. One told me that this was wrong. The other said, maybe he's just trying to help. I didn't know which was right, and then everything changed. His hand slid from my shoulder down to my waist. When I felt the warmth of his hand there, I flinched in shock, but I still couldn't move. I was frozen like a statue. My mind was spinning. The voices in my head were no longer whispering, they were screaming. This isn't right. This shouldn't be happening. But why couldn't I stop it? When his fingers lightly pressed against my waist, my stomach twisted into a knot. A cold sweat ran down my forehead. His breath grew closer to my face, and the fear inside me turned to a strange kind of anger. This wasn't just uncomfortable, it was entirely wrong. He pulled me closer to him. The weight of his hands on my waist felt like chains. My heart was pounding wildly. I felt trapped, like I was locked inside a prison. I closed my eyes, wishing for it to end, even for just a moment, but it didn't. "You're so special, Hanai," he whispered. As he said those words, his lips moved dangerously close to my face. I could feel it, he was about to kiss me, but then something inside me erupted. I knew this wasn't right. I opened my eyes, summoned every ounce of strength I had, and took a step back. His hands slipped from my waist, but his gaze remained fixed on me. "No," I shouted. My voice was shaking, but it was firm. "This isn't right," I said. His eyes widened in surprise, but I didn't care. I grabbed my bag and bolted out of the classroom. As I ran, my eyes filled with tears, but they weren't from fear or sadness. It was a mixture of anger and shame. I was furious with myself. Why didn't I do something sooner? Why did I wait so long? But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't the one to blame. This was wrong, and my teacher had no right to do what he did. That night, all I could think about was what had happened. The feeling of his hands on my waist, the way he spoke those wrong words, the way he looked at me, it all kept replaying in my mind. For a moment, I wondered if I was exaggerating. Was it really that bad? A small voice in my mind told me to let it go. Maybe it wasn't such a big deal. Maybe I was only this upset because I never really knew what affection felt like. But deep down, I knew what he did was unacceptable. The next day, I didn't want to go to school. My legs felt like they were moving backward, but running away would mean he had won. I couldn't let that happen. I gathered my courage and went. After class, I saw him in the hallway. For a moment, my heart stopped. When I looked at his face, the unsettling expression from yesterday was gone. Instead, his eyes held guilt and regret. As he approached me, he avoided my gaze. "I'm sorry, Hanai," he said. His voice cracked as he spoke. "I truly regret what I did yesterday. It was wrong. I know I made you uncomfortable, and I'm so sorry." His words reached my ears, but my mind couldn't accept them. I wanted to believe him, but I didn't. The man in front of me couldn't be the same person from yesterday. He told me he'd help with my grades this time, but that I needed to work harder moving forward. He promised it would never happen again. In that moment, I felt a strange kind of relief, but also a cold anger. I simply nodded and walked away. That moment became a turning point in my life. I learned how to defend my boundaries. I learned not to stay silent in the face of something wrong, and I learned to stand up for my values. I still remember those moments vividly, but I am proud of myself, because that day I said no, and sometimes saying no can be the most powerful yes you'll ever say.